couple of decades ago, it was the years of Mad Men, when they had an adage that 50% of every advertising dollar was a waste of money. The problem was that they just didn't know which 50%. Fast forward to today, and people are saying the same thing about big data. We have so much information that we might not really know where to invest our effort. We know that we're wasting effort, and we know we're missing important information. So welcome to a room where we're going to solve all of these problems. This is a panel that I think is going to be exciting because, first of all, there are practitioners who represent brands, and I'll introduce everyone in just a moment, and also we'll be talking about social network analysis within the context of what is keeping brands in consumer, financial services, hospitality, and sort of the brands we all know and love, and also sort of entrepreneurial companies. What's keeping leadership up at night? This is sort of the non-healthcare part of the day. And the other part of this panel that I think will be very interesting is these are not people who have case studies to share. This will be a panel that has as many questions as answers. So to start that and to set the tone, I'd like everyone to, do you have a pen and a piece of paper? I know that's pretty old school. It could be your iPad. Just write down a question that might be keeping you up at night. What is it in this world of social network analysis capability, in the world of big data, in the world where we have so much information that is keeping you up at night? What would you love for this information to be able to tell you? So take a second and write it down for yourself. And if you want to, at the end, we might have time to share that. And I'll introduce the panel. So we have Larry Miller, who is the CEO of Activate Networks, and will be addressing the capabilities of social network analysis within this context. We also have Brian Cusack, who is with Google, actually the YouTube part of Google, so we'll be talking about the 4 screens and video. And if we thought that it was fun to go from heuristics to semantic search, now we have to look at video and the whole experience of the 0 moment of truth. If you don't know what that is, you'll learn about it in just a few minutes. What it is that gets a consumer to have a desire to be aligned with a brand or to purchase something. We also have Tom Warden, who is with AllState. He's a vice president of research and will represent a brand perspective from AllState, as well as the notion of sort of latent needs and untapped opportunities. And then finally, we have Sean Moffitt, who's written the book Wikibrands, and it's a multiple industry look at what brands are doing in this wiki world where social data is so important and where we have to learn different ways to communicate about brands, et cetera. So what I'd like to do is start with Sean and have him introduce himself a bit. And the context of it is sort of who are you and what is it that you believe brands are thinking about? What are some trends? What are the issues that you think this room should be listening to as we start the panel? So Sean.
Great, and I'm curious as well because I sat in on the last panel and there was a lot of serious research slide in there. So I'm curious to know what portion of this audience is healthcare? Hands up. What portion of this audience is CPG, hospitality? Hands up. Okay, so I have no serious slide for you, so I will dance around here. But I think from a trend standpoint, I find it interesting, and I think this is cross-industry, where the 3 things that marketers, communications, and business, by virtue of that, are investing a lot of growth and time in: social networks, social media, big data, and CRM programs. Those are the 3 things that we're going to invest the most in over the next 2 or 3 years, are also the 3 things that we know little about. And in terms of the research and data that we can grab, there are no benchmarks and standards. There are few, if any, in certain cases, standards of this is good behavior, this is bad behavior. So I think one big trend that's happening is the stuff that I know I'm going to have to spend a lot of money on, I have no idea where the standards are and how do I make sense of this world.
And to that point, I'm glad that you pointed out that this is largely a healthcare audience. We all have backgrounds that probably cross from a healthcare perspective to a brand perspective. And I've been listening to some conversations today that talks about we can all learn from each other. So there's some models that are well researched within the healthcare arena that can train into other brands and probably vice versa. So I think that this cross-industry conversation will be very fruitful. So Tom, what are the trends that are most important for you that you think that this group should be thinking about today?
Well, one of the things that we're very dependent on is our agency network. I mean, we still sell 95% of our product through local agents, and we're seeing the erosion slowly over the last number of years and the migration of consumers from agency channels to direct channels. So there's a new set of influences that they're responding to, which is most likely advertising, driven by Geico with a different message around saving price. And we used to be able to count on the influence the agent had with his or her consumers to understand what their needs were and how to craft coverages for them and all of that. And like it's happened in many other industries before, as stock brokerage, travel agencies, etc., there's a shift in who has influence, who's consumers want more direct control over the decisions they're making, etc. So we're seeing this happen at the same time that advertising seems to be less and less effective in our category, driven by Geico and Progressive to some extent. The amount of spend in traditional advertising and insurance has, I think, tripled in the last 10 years. So you can't watch a sports event, especially, without seeing messages from 3, 4, 5 different insurance companies. So we're seeing the influence of a lever that the two levers we've just depended on the most, agents and advertising, morph and change. Part of that is for different value propositions, but then there's other sort of unaccounted for levels of influence that other areas are having. The social networks obviously have allowed people to confer with their friends more often and things like that. And so our problem, one of our big problems, is we're seeing less effectiveness in what we used to spend money on. We're not seeing the returns from our efforts to leverage online data, online media, and social media to really gain influence with consumers. And that's where my group are researching, is trying to figure out how can we leverage social networks, social information in general, to really help identify where the influence lies and how can we leverage that. Not so much in a we know who's influential and who's not and who amongst their friends they're going to talk to, but even more at an abstract level, I think we can learn enough to really impact the effectiveness and efficiency of our marketing spend. So that's where we are.
That's helpful. So Brian, give us a little framework in terms of what you think the important issues are for the group to hear about from you.
Sure. So first of all, Tom, we can help. Even more than we might be already.
We have mayhem. We have a great
pitch happening right here.
Even more than we are helping. We can help.
Mayhem has been great.
Okay. And actually, I, in the context of, and maybe I'll come back to it, the concept of the zero moment of truth, I think there's a lot that would dovetail perfectly with that conversation. Although I'm nervous talking about the zero moment of truth because it precedes the first moment of truth. And as an ex-P&Ger, that's a term that comes from P&G, so I got to be careful about how expert I appear to be on that when we
if
actually.
If anybody needs a decoder ring, let us know.
But one of the things that we're talking to folks a lot about right now, and I think we're opening a lot of marketers' eyes, is the concept of attribution, and how do you actually attribute what each piece of the marketing funnel or the sales funnel does what to create an eventual transaction or an eventual action between a consumer and a marketer. And we're finding that most marketers aren't even thinking about this. They're thinking about silos of marketing spend for the most part, where there's their online spend, there's their online spend, their offline spend, their search, their display, their TV, their print, and they're not thinking about the relationship between each of them because, frankly, many of the data points that are being gathered right now, if they're being gathered at all, are hard to combine in any kind of cogent way to create some sort of understanding about how they impact each other, and then have the ability to weight each of them in an appropriate way to understand, what the first point of contact with the consumer is worth in conjunction with the last point of contact before that transaction actually happens. So we're not right now trying to, propose or suggest that we know what a formula might look like. But we're spending a lot of time in the marketplace right now actually raising this as a topic for consideration with a number of different proposals for weighting scenarios or for formulas. And And we've built into Google Analytics the capability to do this right now to some extent, where you can actually play with numbers and play with weighting that will eventually have some bearing on how you allocate media dollars. For instance, if you can understand how to attribute each touch point to a weighted value in the sales funnel. So we're spending a lot of time talking about that. I think when you talk to some marketers about it, you actually get fear in their faces because they realize that A, they don't have the expertise, B, they really may not have the data, or if they do, it's not organized in a way to analyze it effectively and appropriately. Now, I spend more time on the video side of the house than the search side of the house or some of the mobile side of the house at Google. And there's an entirely different activity going on in that side of the house right now. And if I were related to what you think of Google most, associate most with Google, which is a text search, essentially, I think that's probably what most of us associate Google with. When you start to think about video, and we'll talk about just video search for a minute, which is a lot of people are doing it, right? If YouTube itself was a search engine, it would actually be the second largest search engine in the world, following Google, right? Lots of searching happening on YouTube every day, every minute. But if you think about the experience, it's an entirely different experience. You're actually searching for an experience, right? You're not searching for some very specific, fairly granular piece of information that most people are doing a text search for. So starting to understand the kind of attitudinal and behavioral perspectives that a consumer has when they do a video search, and then starting to gather data around that to help marketers understand how, because there are just as many marketers who are content creators at a place like YouTube as there are content creators, or content creators we'll call them, or traditional content creators on YouTube. Helping them understand the value of that as opposed to another form of search is something that we're deeply engaged in trying to understand. And again, we're not there yet, but it keeps us up at night, and it keeps our marketing partners up at night too. So it's a really interesting time for us from that perspective. And then, yeah.
And let me jump in just so that we come for a little bit of rebuttal or discussion after that, let's do a quick introduction of Larry as well.
Shut up is what you meant.
Oh, come on.
No, it was sort of TiVo. Let's TiVo the video for a moment so that we can come back and have a conversation.
All right. You know, we saw the audience here is mostly healthcare. And in fact, as you know, it activates 60% of our business is healthcare, but of course 40% is not. But the reason we were particularly grateful for Andrea for organizing this panel and for the other, these non-healthcare panelists to join us, is there are two other capabilities we've developed. I'll just mention them briefly. I don't want to advertise them, but to explain why. One is the ability to map real networks of consumers, residents, anywhere in the U.S. You want us to map the city of Boston and tell you who the influentials are? We can do that. City of San Francisco, state of Iowa. So, and this was very difficult to do. The algorithms are quite complex. And Pete Dewan, who some of you have heard, and his colleagues did a beautiful job doing this. We haven't quite figured out where to aim that capability, and we're hoping we may learn something today. The other side of our business, of course, involves mapping online networks and on what's often called sentiment analysis, but with a twist. We can do this, and this is with Peter Glor, who's in one of the other panels right now, of mapping networks of online commentators and looking at real influence patterns, which we believe most sentiment analysis folks don't do at this point. So this panel is quite interesting to me because I may learn ways we can apply the technology we've developed.
Well, I was just speaking with someone in this audience about how healthcare actually, when we looked at Sharp Healthcare on the West Coast and asked how they won the Baldrige Award, and I was expecting them to talk about multiple healthcare groups that they had benchmarked against. In fact, they said it was the Ritz-Carlton and Disney and a Japanese healing garden that gave them the insights about how to grow their brand. And so the notion of people looking cross-industry for insights is actually quite successful. And we were talking about GE having its heritage in looking cross-industry, whether for leadership it's Google or West Point, to inform them, or with GE Ecomagination and GE Medical to look at some emerging trends and figure out how they as a company can land on them. So this panel actually, I think, will be very informative for all of us, how we can borrow the best from each of our industries and apply it to these pretty interesting questions. So I'd like to ask, I asked Sean, since he's the author of the book on Wikibrands, to name some names, you know, like some specific brands that you think, Sean, have stories that are very informative about how people are thinking about this information and the ways we can slice it and dice it these days.
Well, it's funny, Larry mentioned kind of influence and influence networks, because I think there's a lot of panels that talk about social media networks as kind of this social utopia where let's just embrace and hug this entire population of people that might like your brand, and magically enough they don't like your brand, and you wonder after you're 3 months after you launch something in social networks why things aren't happening. And I think, if anything, the great thing about digital is you know who are the most important people. The unfortunate thing is it's tough to find these people, which is, I guess, what the mousetrap you've developed here, Larry. And one example for me is Microsoft. Microsoft, I interviewed a number of people within their heads of community and marketing food chain, and they said, look, it's quite disingenuous for consultants to come inside Microsoft and say, look, we can help you. All you have to do is change your culture, change everything that you do, and magically people will like you. Forgetting the fact that Microsoft is a big, big cruise ship, and it's very tough to switch it. The other thing is they are mentioned on blogs something to the tune of 8 million times a year. So to actually staff up, to actually engage people, 8 million separate interactions, you would probably have to triple, if not quadruple, the employee base. Focus strictly on that. So I think from their standpoint, they have a program called Microsoft MVPs. I think it equally applies to healthcare based on what I just saw in the last session, that they need to know who the most important people are in their world. And it's quite disproportionate. I would say in their world, 5% of their population, if not less, constitutes the grand wealth of content, solutions. I mean, really, Microsoft wouldn't exist as a company right now if they didn't have a surrounding community of people that actually help them. And they help them pretty much for 3 different reasons. One, they help fix things. I don't know if you've ever seen a new Microsoft product. It doesn't exactly work right out of the box. And it's usually not an employee that actually fixes it. Somebody else from outside their community. You need to find those people. The second thing is, if you're in healthcare and you have a Microsoft product, you need to know how it works for my specific needs. And so they have MVPs that focus on category-specific solutions. All non-employees, once again. And also you've got a third group of people that are just madly passionate about Microsoft and want to advertise and proselytize to their communities. And so Microsoft uses their MVPs as marketing tools as well. And so, Microsoft, great example. I would consider healthcare being in the same industry of how do I find people that make my products better, that know different solutions for the products that may not currently exist, and also market my product to other people, as I just learned from the previous presentation.
So let me ask Tom as a case in point in terms of information that you wish you could glean, and I'll quote Sean Moffitt, who said, how do you turn insight into foresight? So you can see many things, and big data is so sexy that now we know that Target can tell when we're pregnant before our husbands can. This is lovely to know. But what are the kinds of questions that, the latent information that you as a brand would love to be able to discover that the current tools are where they're falling short?
Yeah, it starts with who's influential? Who do you turn to? We know that 50% of insurance consumers, when they're about to make a purchase, turn to a family or friend member. We don't know who that person is. Now, so our challenge is the lack of data in this sense, because Microsoft and other brands like that have people that are very passionate about them. Insurance is not a very passionate product for most people, unless we've fixed something incredibly well in a catastrophe kind of situation, or if we've done something very poorly. But most people don't say much to their friends or neighbors about the fender benders that are 90% of the claims that we settle. So we are trying to really understand how do people's personal networks alter their feelings and opinions, and can we turn more people into advocates for us, because it's a very dispassionate product. At least even those of us who live in it aren't very passionate about it sometimes. So that's the other side of the challenge, I think, in the space. There's so much potential, but we just don't really have a lot of stuff to go on.
So Brian, I have a different kind of question to throw at you, which is this notion of the 4 screens, the mobile. We are connected in different ways for the definition maybe of zero moment of truth and first moment of truth. Yeah, sure. The notion of how we start caring about an entity, whether it's a brand, whether it's a healthcare provider. I wouldn't mind a little short definition of that, and then sort of what that looks like in the world today and what's missing from what you can understand.
Yeah. So You'll correct me if I'm wrong. First moment of truth was a phrase and concept coined by P&G a couple of decades ago, I think, and it refers to the 3 to 5 seconds that transpire between the time a consumer sees something on a shelf and they choose to buy it or not. That's the first moment of truth. And in fact, about 10 years ago, P&G actually created a position called Director of First Moment of Truth, so that they could, what's that?
That's a cool title.
It's a cool title. That was before you could just make up your own title all the time in the world. So, to determine how from a merchandising perspective, a marketing perspective, et cetera, you could make sure that in those 3 to 7 seconds, it's a P&G product that's selected from the shelf. So our assertion is that there's actually something that happens before the first moment of truth, and if it's before 1, it has to be 0. So the 0 moment of truth is actually something that occurs before that retail or physical exposure to a product or a service even. It applies to insurance, or it can apply to retail, it can apply to a number, selecting something on the shelves at a drugstore. And that it can occur in a number of different ways, and many of them are going to be online today, although they're not all online. And in fact, they could be referral through a family member, for instance, could qualify as the 0 moment of truth. So we've actually been trying to do a lot of research on this too, to understand this, to help guide marketers like Tom. And in fact, I think we've done some research against some insurance companies that suggest that the buy happens over a series of months, but on average there are 11.5 different 0 moment of truth points that happen before there's a decision made, and many of these will happen in, with traditional advertising or current advertising today and online, or even those social networks, those family
networks. I think that the whole concept of the marketing funnel, that linear depiction of that is so outdated. And I'm sure many of us experience the same thing when we buy products. It's a series of interactions that lead you through many of those steps, but you cycle through it many times.
Right, and so it does get really hard, as Tom described, to figure out where to apply limited budgets. I mean, if we just think about it in that simple form, how do you apply limited budgets? How do you measure that? How do you measure the impact of each of those points? So, in a 4-screen world, your tablet, your phone, your laptop, your television. It's actually a 5-screen world if you consider gaming devices as well. People are exposing themselves to content oftentimes simultaneously, so then it becomes even harder to measure the impact of each contact through each of those devices or each of those screens. But they're also engaging in each of those screens for likely a completely different activity. One is entertainment. One is shopping. The largest activity on tablets right now is actually shopping, essentially shopping for products, trying to use sight, sound, and motion to help aid the search and shopping activity. Something else entirely different happens on the smartphone when you're walking down the street or in a store doing a last-minute price check. So again, these are all different data points that start to be gathered in your exposure to that consumer, and trying to understand what is that activity on that screen, how to weight that data point, make sure you're delivering the right weight of media against it, but also the right creative, because now you need a distinctive creative for each one of the screens in all likelihood. So it starts to become an even more daunting activity. But I wanted to take 1 second to talk about the growth of different types of communities, because we talked about Microsoft's community, we've talked a little bit about going to family members 50% of the time. I think there are different types of communities, or maybe there's similar communities that have existed in the past, but existing for different reasons on a place like YouTube right now. And it is related certainly to retailers, and it could be related to technology companies, technology vendors. And I'm not necessarily imagining all the way through to health providers yet, but maybe you guys can do that when I give you an example here. There's a phenomenon happening on YouTube right now where individuals who have their own authentic voice, right? They're not traditional trained experts on something, are actually becoming the experts and the heroes around certain products or product categories. And in retail, they're called haulers, right? They bring home products from a store, they open it, they make a video of themselves, they put it on YouTube, and they talk about, here's the deal I got, here's how it looks on me, here's why you might want to think about it. And what happens is, because it's not branded, there's no marketer behind it, it's totally authentic, they actually get many people to follow them because of their authenticity. So we have these individuals on YouTube who literally have hundreds of thousands of people who follow them. So basically that means every time they post a video, more people watch them open their bag from Target than watch many cable television shows right now.
It's incredible.
True.
I'm going to switch gears for Sean to ask Larry a question, because we've just been immersed in social network analysis. And right up until, we were talking about VisiCalc. Does anybody remember VisiCalc? Yes, it was a very old, long ago program. Every number had to be truncated to 8 digits. It was a very long time ago, but in those days, also market research had to be, people in malls with clipboards. And now some of the tools haven't progressed much further than that. Social network analysis brings a whole level and nuance to what you can really understand about what the consumer's experiencing, whether it's in healthcare or in consumer goods. So I wonder if you would have a question for Larry, Sean, about this moment whereby maybe there's a question or a latent need that you wonder if social network analysis could be engaged with.
Yeah, let me try this one out for
Sure.
Larry. As a former chief marketer myself, I'm somewhat vexed sometimes, and I think we're getting at it in terms of we spend so much time looking at metrics and monitoring and reporting to our management, and so little time actually making sense of this stuff and operationalizing what we've learned that, I guess in an Activate Networks world, how much of, does your mousetrap make it easier for me, a chief marketing officer spending 70 hours a week at the office, to actually speed up the time between, when I got the data and what was the insight I got from it? Because back in the day, I'm not quite as VisiCalc friendly, but certainly
I think that meant old.
Back in my day, it was like,
It wasn't friendly.
back in my day, at
he's
P&G
very
as a
young.
neophyte, you'd have the Nielsen's of the world run off and spend 3 months learning something, and then they'd come back with a pristine PowerPoint report that's been worked on for. The data would have been 6 months old that they had been looking at, and so by the time you get to it, it's like, oh my lord. The web, there's a power there in the fact that it's quicker, but the problem is there's so much stuff out there that you need somebody to distill what I got to do with this now. So in a long-winded way, does this help me as a marketer or not?
Well, we'll try.
Particularly from a speed standpoint.
Yeah, there are 2 parts of the question. First of all, you're awash in data, and it's getting worse, and it's getting worse and worse. The average big company now, you may have seen this, has roughly the same amount of data that is in the entire Library of Congress. And that's going to increase and probably increase exponentially. So what do you do? And those of you may have heard Steve Lyons talk about big data in the last session, got a little piece of that. And we don't pretend we're the only answer. We're a small piece of the answer, but it's an important piece. Can you use a network analysis to help you interpret that data and to make it actionable? And the answer, we think in many instances, not all, many instances will be yes. Maybe to approach both the other part of your question, I need to move more quickly. The Wikibrands showed that the speed of everything has increased exponentially as well. You don't have months or years to build a brand anymore. You better do it fast, and you better do it thoroughly. And again, this is of course always risky for me to say when I have some of the best network scientists in the world in the room, but one of the things the networks do, of course, is move information very quickly, information and behavior change, if you can use them. And they move them very extensively. They move them all the way through a network, if you can choose appropriately. So we do keep coming back to influence because it's critical. If you can use influence effectively, you can move messages through network, you can move behavior changes through network, you can move them quickly, and you can get through the entire network. So that's what we'd hope to give you is speed, power, and at least a way you don't have to spend all your time looking at data.
Yeah.
One of the things I heard recently was a representative from the Hyatt talking about how they felt about Yelp. And they said when it first came out, they resisted it. Well, when they first came out, they actually edited it. So if it was anything negative, they would erase it. And then they discovered that that was not viewed positively by the guests. Then they came to a really authentic place where they realized that this was actually quite useful. And now they're actually using that same Yelp information for foresight into what to do next and realizing that there's tremendous power in people voicing their opinions, negative or positive. So I wonder if there's sort of the promise, I'll turn to Tom, where you as a brand have evolved from market research opportunity and technique A to B to C, and now to social network analysis. If you could, now once again, there are no case studies here. These are not people who have experienced it yet. But as a person who's just been exposed to this promise of the social network analysis as one of the arrows in the quiver. What would be something that you think would be an interesting and intriguing context within AllState for you to try this out that might be different from these other techniques that you have?
Sure, and I think that I've talked so far just about enhancing our marketing effectiveness, but really what we want to do at a higher level is influence people's behavior around their driving, around how they're, how safe they are in their homes. So really, if we can create incentives for changed behavior around driving in a safer manner. We're selling a telematics product in 3 states and soon to be more, where the safer you drive as captured by the device, the more of a discount you earn. We're working on some technologies that can help prevent a lot of very damaging and very disruptive losses in the home, like shutting off the water to your house when a leak occurs almost instantaneously. So these are all relatively new technologies that have a lot of barriers against them from people's perception of, why would I want to share my data with my insurance company? Why would I want to put this thing on my pipe because it costs $200 and I may never need it? So again, I mean, the more we can demonstrate to people who are adopters of those things that there's positive things coming from AllState, not just the bill in the mail and the raise of the rates when things go bad and all of that, it can help, I think, very rapidly change the perception of a company like ours in the public, which is, I think, a big part of our corporate strategy, is to really change perceptions so that people feel like they really are our partners in helping them stay safe, not just some cold intermediary that's, they're sending money to and we're sending money back to. So I think that there are those types of applications.
So I'm going to put Brian on the spot and ask Brian to engage a little bit with Larry also, as far as, if the promise were met that social network analysis could add a layer or a nuance to this 4-screen world or the world of the YouTube, Google experience. What would an intriguing intersection be from your perspective if the promise of social network analysis were layered into your skill set?
So I don't know if we have engineers working on this already, but I'm going to continue my story from before for the purpose of this question. I mentioned hundreds of thousands of these people who look at a single hauler. But here's what happens, right? Because this is a very social activity, and there's data that's created as a result, or activity that should result in data, right? So shopper puts up video. 400,000 people watch it at once, more than a cable television show. Walmart actually associates their brand with her in an authentic way, okay? She talks about, I bought it at Walmart. It still appears to be authentic. But here's what happens now. These 400,000 people watching it on YouTube, and YouTube is a totally social site, have a lot of things they can do, right? They can rate it, like, dislike. They can comment. They can share. They can respond with a video. They can embed. There's lots of activities that they can do. Actually, the #1 source of videos on Facebook is YouTube. #1 source of videos on Twitter is YouTube. It's an ignition point for a lot of things. Now the brand is associated with that activity. How do we put value on those social activities beyond the traditional advertising metric of the impression? Right. Most people think of that as in the media world. That's owned, paid, owned, and earned media, right? But it's not as measured as it can be. How do you start to put better measures on this earned media?
It's an interesting question. I think
you want to monetize it too, don't you?
Well,
once you get that
get
number.
to that. No.
Sure.
You need a new category, right? As you say, there's paid, owned, earned, and what's the new one? The new one is one could argue a social category, a network category, whatever you'd like to call it. You've got people following each other, but it's usually not, in our experience, and I suspect yours, it's not quite so simple. And I think someone pointed this out, and several pointed this out at earlier sessions. I know Pete did. Influence relationships aren't simply I influence you and it's one way. That's unusual. It's often I may influence you, but you may influence me back, or your friends may influence me. These are often complicated webs. It's one of the reasons we need fairly complex statistics to look at them. So as one is thinking of, you've got haulers and the people who watch their videos, well, that seems one way, but it's almost certainly going to be more complicated. If you could begin to map those networks, and at YouTube you certainly have those, you have the data. Yeah. That's often one of the huge barriers to network analysis. Does the data exist? Well, this is one instance where it does exist. You could begin to see these complex patterns and begin to analyze them, I think, systematically. I have one other comment, of course. You said, I'm counting screens, and I think you're up to 5.
Yeah.
I saw the picture of those Google glasses in the paper 2 weeks ago. So that'll be 6.
That's my son is, Dad, when are you bringing those home?
Yeah.
Google
I'd like, can I sign up too?
Please sure, sign up. I'm not sure what I can do.
So we have a time constraint, so I'd like one person from the audience to talk a little bit about, from a healthcare perspective, what you gleaned from the panel so far, and then I'm going to ask Sean to kind of give us the punchline. So is there anyone from the group who maybe comes from a healthcare background who can connect the dots between what we've been talking about from a brand perspective, from maybe a consumer brand perspective, back to healthcare? What was an aha that you might have had that does track well with the world of healthcare?
Need somebody brave.
This is a very
That would be
Canadian
Tom.
audience.
That would be Tom. No, we have the guy in the front. Tom.
Yeah, I'll just start. But the interesting thing when I heard the other Tom talk from AllState is, from a healthcare perspective, a lot of the companies are in a similar position to you, which is they existed way before the social networking phenomena had an influence anywhere. And to a large extent, they're focused on the old way of doing things without realizing the potential for connecting even the data they have internally. You know, like in your case, can you connect your life insurance database, your homeowner's insurance database, the automobile database to see if I see something happening in one, that indicates something else. Or if I see a change in a 9-digit zip code, how can I communicate to my agent, here are the 5 customers you ought to call this week, because they would have the most influence on your business. And it's similar, healthcare, and particularly pharmaceuticals, going through changing a sales rep's perspective from, I've got a call plan, I'm going to go around and call on all these doctors, to, if you could only see 2 doctors this week that could permeate an influence on your brand, who would they be? And to be able to update that dynamically, because 3 weeks from now it's going to be 2 different doctors.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges we're seeing with our agents is that consumers perceive them to be less relevant because there's so much information available online, and the agents used to be the gatekeepers to a lot of that information years ago. And so, you know, the vast majority of our business still comes through agents, and we're not seeing that channel go away anytime in the near future. It's just being challenged very significantly. So one of my longer-term goals is to leverage just what you said, the knowledge that we can learn from network behavior, so that our agents can be perceived by their communities to be much more relevant than they have been, because some of them now have 2,000, 3,000 customers, and they can't provide that sort of Ward, June Cleaver relationship that used to exist, where they knew everything about everybody and everything going on in the community. So there's lots of potential here to make people who have become irrelevant because of the flood of data more relevant again by doing what you just said. Yes, I agree.
So we'll be in the hall afterwards for autographs. The rock band will be playing. But I would like Sean as a bookend to the panel, because we started with his quote of, you know, how you bring this in big data, how you bring an insight, which seemed like a great idea even 10 days ago, to foresight. You know, what do you do? How do you make decisions about where to invest time and effort? So Sean, do you have a wrap up for us, words of wisdom perspective?
Well, I'm going to bridge from Tom's point. I guess both Toms. I mean, are we all Tom in this room, really? I love the fact that you said those 2 doctors that you might go this week. It might be a different 2 doctors next month, and I do think there is this, it's a moving target, some of this stuff. Certainly, a small anecdote, when I actually started my own business, I sent a form letter to Malcolm Gladwell. I was transfixed by the tipping point, and I thought, I got to set up an entire business around influence and word of mouth. And he gave me a crisply worded note back on email. We all did stuff on email, no social media back then. And I took the 6 pieces of advice that made sense to me, and I ignored the piece of advice that I thought wasn't part of my business model. I spent 1.5 years doing word of mouth and recognized later that the thing that I avoided from Malcolm Gladwell is the one thing I should have applied, and that is influence is very, very category specific, and it's very, very time based. And so, you know, I saw therapeutic classes earlier. You know, if you're great in cancer, you're probably not going to be great in a different drug based on just the specialization of healthcare. But I also think there are different roles people play in different networks. I kind of think there are very few models out there that allocate for the fact there are certain people that always want to be first in line and get very disinterested 6 months later and move on to the next thing. There are other people that are opinion leaders that right when you're about to launch something, they probably play a more pivotal role. Like they're the experts, they test everything, they bulletproof it, they probably read consumer reports, and so they're the people that you go to validate the stuff that's just launched. And then there are the Kardashian-like celebrities that come in 6, 12 months later that say, hey, I'm here now, it looks like it's a real thing, so I'm going to encase myself in this world. So it was very interesting. I saw some stuff from Activate around these different roles people play in networks, because I think we oversimplify influence by saying, yeah, you're just one type of influencer, when there's really, really many types of influence. And the one other thing I would note on that is visualizing it. We spend so little time moving from monitoring to insight to foresight, that how can a company actually just, it's almost like I want to have a bomb blow up on my screen when I realize I've just had an insight. And if great network software can do that for me, then I'm going to be much further ahead as a marketer.
Well, thank you to the panel. It was excellent, interesting. Thanks, everybody here. I'll talk to you soon.
And I'd like to thank Andrea and the panelists again from Activate. We really appreciate you joining us. And then we'll close the session today with Nicholas Christakis.